All in Sports Network. We love sports.
Hey, everybody, the dust has settled, and after the voters gathered and discussed, we have the ultimate poll that was released on Tuesday. We are, of course, talking about the college football playoff rankings, the inaugural rankings of the 2024 season. Welcome into All in Aggies. I'm your host, Ben Peck, per usual. Apologies for being a little behind on stuff this week. You'll understand, for me, working in the news industry is a pretty chaotic time, and it is all hands on deck when we get to things such as polls that we will discuss, different type of polls for me on Tuesday I was having to work with. But we are going to break down the first college football playoff rankings and also take a look at some of the A&M basketball struggles. Really just a brutal week for A&M sports altogether. You had 5 different teams losing matches or games. Started with football in South Carolina, and then you go down the list to soccer, volleyball on the same day. On Sunday, soccer season is over, and then you start the basketball season on Monday with a pair of losses, including a late collapse is probably too hard, but a late stumbling on the road at UCF, and then for the men, and then the women falling to A&M Corpus Christi. So we'll break down a little bit of the basketball stuff as well. But first, I want to talk about these playoff rankings. What do we learn from them? What do we know? And what is meaningful going forward as it relates to Texas A&M? So pull up the top 12 right here for you. And not pictured, Texas A&M at number 14. Just above them at number 13 is SMU. Quick caveats to point out, of course. Now, personally, I wish they would have ranked the teams 1 through 25, and then we could have seen the seeding as a separate deal. Because, of course, the top 4 seeds received that first round bye and are all conference champions. And then the next best conference champion is placed into the top 12 wherever they fall. In this case, it is Boise, but that does not necessarily mean Boise State is number 12 in the true rankings, quote unquote. Same with BYU being number 4 necessarily. Oregon, Georgia, Miami, that's probably what they would be otherwise. But let's take a look at specifically for Texas A&M's path making it to the college football playoff. Now, before I look into it a little bit further, I will just acknowledge, I think to be comfortably in, A&M has to win out. Could they get in at 9-3 with a little bit of chaos? And you're only 3 losses to some pretty good teams. By the way, LSU number 14, maybe. But I'm going to, for the sake of this conversation, I am going to, for the sake of argument, I'm going to assume A&M would finish the regular season 10-2, and then we'll discuss really 10-2, and then they lose in the SEC championship game to go 10-3. That is the tricky scenario to ascertain that I want to take a look at. But we'll bring up the rankings once again. So first of all, Notre Dame being number 10 and LSU being number 14, massively helpful. Now, LSU's got to play Alabama. That could be tricky. They're going to be at home, so we'll see how that goes. But a couple things I'm worried about for A&M in the situation where they finished the year 10-3. That's beating Texas and losing to presumably Georgia in the SEC championship game. If that were to happen, let's say Tennessee you see there at number 8. If they lose to Georgia but win out, they would be 10-2 with a win over Alabama, and A&M would be 10-3 with a win over Texas as their best win, and losses to quality teams like Notre Dame, LSU, and Georgia. Could A&M potentially finish behind Tennessee? Could really that last loss put them out behind Tennessee? I think the jury's still out, but I don't love where these rankings are, considering the fact I know Tennessee has 1 loss and A&M has 2, but really the question is going to be how much are they going to value teams or give teams a pass that make it to their conference championship games and come out with a loss, as opposed to the teams that finish outside of that, don't make it to Atlanta or wherever their respective championship game is, and finish the year 10-2 with the same amount of wins, but fewer losses on the year. Because again, there's a situation where Tennessee, their upcoming schedule, Mississippi State at Georgia, home against UTEP, and at Vanderbilt. And you'd be talking about losses in that scenario to Arkansas on the road and Georgia on the road. And A&M would have losses on the road at South Carolina and at home against Notre Dame. By the way, I keep misspeaking. LSU, a win, by the way, of course. Blanked out there. But needless to say, you've got a good win against Notre Dame. South Carolina could be rising up the polls, and a good win against LSU is what I had meant to say. And then you'd have a good win against Texas. So would A&M be on the outside looking in at that point? I think I'll bring it up again. I'm probably going to be doing this throughout the segment, so just bear with me. I think by that point, Indiana or Ohio State would factor out. See, but I don't know if Indiana loses just to Ohio State and Ohio State wins every other game. Like, does a one-loss Indiana hang in there? Maybe. If Indiana beats Ohio State and Ohio State has 2 losses to Indiana and Oregon and they don't go to Indianapolis, does Ohio State stay in there? Maybe. Does Penn State hang around if they win out the rest of the year? I want to take a look at their schedule. Bear with me while I pull that up. I'm just going to be reading it here. Not going to have it up on the screen, but Penn State's schedule is pretty manageable the rest of the way. If I'm not mistaken, they got home against Washington, at Purdue, at Minnesota, home against Maryland. So you could see Ohio State beating or losing to Indiana and winning out. You could see Penn State winning out the rest of the way. Texas would have the loss to A&M. You would presume that would put them above Texas if Texas were to win out and A&M were to be the head-to-head. But could you have somebody rising from beneath? Again, it's still a little bit too early to tell, but I basically think there's a world where Tennessee, let's just say the top 4 stay the same. I think there's a world where Ohio State could stay in there as well as Indiana. And then if Tennessee wins out, with the exception of Georgia, they stay in the top 12. Penn State stays in the top 12. Texas could be the one to fall out. Notre Dame, I think, could stay in there. And then Alabama was the other team I wanted to touch on. Alabama, if they win out, that means they beat LSU, they beat Mercer, Oklahoma, and Auburn. I think that's doable for Alabama. So really it would be A&M in there over Texas and Texas alone if they were to go. Like, does A&M to that degree? If Alabama has 2 losses and their 2 losses are against Tennessee, which would be in the playoff in this hypothetical, and to Vanderbilt, would those 2 losses be enough to keep them still ahead of A&M, assuming A&M wins out and the only other thing they get is a win over Texas and then they lose another game, granted in an SEC championship game? I don't know. But I do think A&M probably makes it if they go 10-3. I think it's a little perilous, though, potentially, just because those Big Ten teams do not play each other. They, like, Indiana and Ohio State face off, but really that's the only of the 4 that are in there. That's the only matchup of those. And if Indiana only has 1 loss, I would argue their strength of schedule would not match up with a 10-3 A&M. But I could see them kind of doing the thing where they lose to Ohio State, they help Ohio State, or vice versa, or Indiana beats Ohio State, and then they're clearly not going to fall out, but then Ohio State still is deemed a higher caliber opponent. That reminded me of back in the day. I enjoyed watching USC hand up 05, and they had a year, or actually I guess this would have been 08 by this point. They had a year where it was when Texas Tech beat Texas, and you think, okay, well, they needed Texas to lose because Texas was number one. They needed them to lose at some point. But then Texas didn't fall so far down enough that they fell below like USC, who's like, on the edges of the top 8 or whatever. So then you think, okay, Texas Tech takes out Texas. That opens up a spot, or you leap one of those teams. But turns out they both stay above you. So I don't know if we're getting in that situation, but I do think you're probably looking at, obviously, if they run the table, go 11-2, they're in. If they go 9-3, I think that's dicey. I think maybe that's the biggest takeaway. I don't think 9-3 is going to be good enough. I do think you need to go 10-2 in the regular season. 10-3, I think if you do get in there, I could envision, with no upsets, and that's saying a lot this college football season, I could envision A&M being stuck somewhere in that 10-11 range and maybe bumping Texas out. That would maybe be the sweetest part for A&M, that you would get the last, or one of the last at-larges, with Texas on the outside looking in, because you had the head-to-head over them. So I would imagine that would play itself out. But listen, it's early. Just wanted to kind of go through some chaos scenarios where you could see how the math could play out again. We'll bring it up one more time. You've got your top 4 conference champs. You've got Ohio State, who plays Indiana, but otherwise has a manageable schedule. Penn State, you could say the same. I think Texas, to back it up, fairly manageable other than the A&M game. I think they've got, Florida. They've got Kentucky. So they should be able to do all right, aside from A&M, where that could be a tight game. Tennessee's manageable. Indiana's manageable other than Ohio State. Notre Dame should be manageable. And Alabama, again, another team that could and should probably win out, with the exception of maybe LSU on the road coming up this Saturday. So I think it all comes down to Texas and Texas A&M. And again, I don't know if the win over Texas would be enough to leapfrog one of those other teams ahead of them, if the other teams take care of their business. I misspoke on Tennessee. Tennessee, we're assuming, could win out with the exception of losing to Georgia. So could A&M supplant them? Probably, but would a 10-3 A&M stay above them? Would they stay above a 10-2 at Alabama or Tennessee? I don't know. So that's what I'm looking for the rest of the year, as to wait and see. You'd really like to see one of those other teams fall off, just to give a little bit of cushion. And then SMU, I think, will work itself out. SMU, are they ACC title or bust? I don't think necessarily. SMU's at 13, right above A&M at 14. I think there's a world where they could run the table, lose to Miami, and if Indiana loses a couple games, or Alabama or something, maybe sneak in there. Could I see SMU in over A&M, a 10-3 A&M? Maybe, if they only lose to Miami the rest of the way, but I don't know. We'll have to see. But fascinating stuff to break down the inaugural college football playoff rankings. I do think it's notable too, by the way, that if we're going off resumes and sort of the eye test, as they say, you were curious what they would do with teams like Ole Miss, for example, and Ole Miss not. And LSU, even, for that matter. Ole Miss at 16, LSU at 15. Now, Iowa State and Pitt just one loss, 17-18. So it does seem like, in some ways, they're, and SMU with one loss at 13. So it seems like in some ways they're rewarding teams based off their record, in a similar way to what we saw with the 4-team field and the BCS. But as soon as you get those losses, it really drops you down pretty heavily. So maybe if Indiana loses and they only have one loss to Ohio State, but they're not in their championship game, maybe they do fall behind an SEC finalist, even if that SEC finalist ends up having 3 losses and Indiana has 1. But we'll just have to wait and see how much they factor and reward teams for making their conference championship game, or at least don't hold it against them. All right. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe, like the video, comment on location once again, as this week has just been thrown into pure chaos for me, just between, Monday we go talk to Mike Elko and the folks, get ready for election season and what I have to do for my, NBC station in Waco College Station. So did some prep for that, went to the women's basketball game on Monday, and then Tuesdays running around like crazy. And then today, kind of recovering from that. And now we're getting back on our feet here and ready to talk. And by the way, also, I'm keeping tabs on Baylor stuff going on too. So Baylor had a game at like 10:30 after the women's basketball game against Gonzaga. So that's a whole separate story. But anyways, a busy week, but we appreciate you being here. Like and subscribe if you enjoy the Texas A&M content we bring to you on a daily, a weekly basis, hopefully a daily basis when things aren't too crazy. All right. I am going to talk a little basketball now. I'm admittedly going to refrain from too much analysis and insight. I have not had a chance to fully watch the A&M UCF game just yet. I did watch pockets and I did watch stretches of this game. And look, mixed emotions, because you go on the road against a legit home environment against a team that is not, they came into Austin and beat Texas last year. I think they beat them at home last year, if I'm not mistaken too. Did they sweep Texas in the Big 12? They might've, but Johnny Dawkins is a really good coach. They beat Texas on the road. I'm just looking at their schedule from last year real quick. They beat Texas Tech at home, Oklahoma State on the road. They were pretty bad. They beat Oklahoma at home. So they beat Kansas. They beat Kansas last year. I forgot about that. So they can make some noise, and there's a chance UCF ends up being relatively decent this year. So we'll have to kind of wait and see as to determining how much that this looks like a good loss, an acceptable loss, or a bad loss. You remember Memphis last year at the time A&M lost to Memphis looked pretty good or not terrible. And then by the time the tournament came around, that was a drag. Same with Ohio State. That was the opposite. Ohio State, they win at Ohio State. That looked like a pretty decent win for a while. And then the Buckeyes started to fall off a little bit. So that was a little tale of two seasons there, or tale of two resumes, if you will. So wait and see what UCF turns into. But the biggest thing for me is they did obviously struggle to close this game out. They got off to the hot start, which is something that was encouraging, because that has been a theme with Buzz Williams, not just at A&M, but across the board, is teams traditionally struggle out of the gate and struggle with the non-conference because they do so much like chemistry building that isn't super basketball specific, to where sometimes on the court it can maybe take a little bit extra time to translate. But you saw them kind of get off to the run, game tightens up, and then they get off to that run once again. Wade Taylor hits that logo three. You're thinking, okay, they've got their rhythm. They're up by, let's see, I'm looking to see kind of what the most emphatic lead they had was. They were up by 11 with 6:24, and then that's when UCF starts to chip away. I think the biggest thing for this team is and has been the scoring droughts throughout Buzz Williams' tenure. It's sort of, analytically, I think it's the balance of analytically, you want the most efficient shot that has the most efficient output in terms of points per possession, expected points per, attempt, and all that stuff. But then you can do that and have a lull to where, especially on the road, like I use this analogy. Would you rather have a shot that is, and this isn't necessarily, this is more a deep meta analysis of the A&M philosophy rather than this game specifically. But again, I got to go back and watch the whole thing, see just how it played out within the flow of it. But like I always say, would you rather have a 33% 3-point shot where you do the math, and that is like I don't know, whatever, 1.5 points. You do 3 possessions, that's 3 points. Or would you rather have a 33% 3-point shot is equal to a 50% 2-point shot? That's what I'm saying. Or would you rather have a 44% look from 2, 45% look from 2? I know the math says to take the 3, and over time that adds up, but I do feel like in college basketball, especially with the possessions on the road, there is something to be said for avoiding lulls and droughts and seeing the score consistently tick up, and maybe the rate at which it does can fluctuate, but you don't want to get to a position where you're just stuck, because then I think those 33% looks that should be 33% maybe drop down a little bit, and some of those 2-point shots that should be easier fall down because you're out of rhythm, you're out of confidence, and that sort of thing. It's kind of hard to quantify that, but that's always been a belief of mine. So that turned out to be a big drag for A&M in that second half when they go. And I know there was, I think, a contested goaltend that some people think, but you had 60 points with 4 minutes to go in the game, and you end the game with 61 points. That's where I'm saying I would like to see ways to be able to avoid that. Not that they're not trying. I know they are, but that's something we've seen these teams struggle with at times. And then the other thing is a mixed bag for me. I want to see the problem last year with that team at times was if you're getting 20, 25 points from Wade Taylor and you're getting another 15 points from Tyrese Radford, maybe that's 40 points between those guys. And then maybe Henry Coleman can give you 10 points, although he was a little off last year, just banged up and stuff. And that puts you at 50 points. And then you've got to kind of scrounge around for maybe, a few from Jace Carter, a few from Anderson Garcia, a few from Solomon Washington. And if you need to get a game into the mid-high 70s, 80s, it can be tough to get there. Mixed bag in this sense, in that 61 points, which isn't terrible. It's not great, but it's not terrible. Wade Taylor only gives you 13. Pharrell Payne gives you 15, so that's good. He was really efficient, though, 6 for 9. Now, beyond that, there was a solid mixture of guys with, Solomon Washington. I mean, literally, go down the list. Solomon Washington, Jace Carter, Henry Coleman, and CJ Wilcher all gave you 6 or more points. And then you got points from everyone who played except for Hayden Hefner. So that is somewhat encouraging in that you have maybe a variety of options there. Who can Jace Carter go off for double digits? Like, if all those guys are able to go for double digits on any given night, that's really good. But then the downside, you're still asking a lot from Wade Taylor, and that leads to maybe high output nights, but inefficient nights. 4 for 11 from 3, which isn't terrible, but 4 for 15 from the field, which is not, 0 for 4 from 2. Let's just think of it that way. 0 for 4 from 2, 13 points. Pharrell Payne was really the only guy who had high output, high efficiency with the 15 points. And then, Manny Obaski, I think, is the one, only 1 for 3 in 15 minutes. So I'm not going to sound the alarm too much, but he's a guy based on how he played at the end of last year. I think best case scenario for this team, Manny Obaski proves to be the kind of guy who can give you that baseline of 10 points and then maybe go up to 15, 20 points on his night. We only saw 2 from him in 15 minutes. We'll see if that adjusts over the course of the season. Really, Jace Carter got those minutes that you would have from a guy just able to be on the floor to score that much. Jace Carter, 2 for 6, 1 for 2, 2 for 4 from the free throw line. So 7 points, not by no means their biggest problem on the night, but that was a struggle. 3-point shooting was okay, 7 for 23, but the overall from the floor, 36%. Free throws, they had 14 free throws. We know how much they love to pride themselves on getting to the line more. That was also really the game defensively. You allow 31 free throws to 14 for you. You still double up in offensive rebounds, but Yeah, gotta prevent them from getting to the line, and just have to have a lot of reliable options. Hayden Hefner, if he can be a legit 3-point shooter, he'll they could be pretty nice. I'm not saying it all hinges on him, but that's going to be a big factor. But 0 for 3, and one of them was desperation at the end, but not desperation 3, but kind of a flurry at the end. But 0 for 3. We'll see if he can get it together. If he can get rolling, Manny Obaski can step up. Jace Carter can, reliably get you 8 points or so a game. Solomon Washington can kind of do what he did, 6 points, 6 rebounds, 9 rebounds, but 3 for 10. If he can maybe do that with being a little more efficient, I think this team can be okay. But they fall 64-61 to UCF, and the ladies. Oh boy, the ladies fall 62-56 to A&M Corpus Christi. This was just a brutal night. 3 of 25 shooting from 3 for the A&M women's basketball team. And I think there's a lot of concern for me moving forward. But as much as some of my concerns are defensively, there were a lot of warning signs as well. This was head coach Joni Taylor after the game, along with Lauren Ware, discussing some of those problems for Texas A&M against A&M Corpus Christi.
It's what I don't want to say I'm not shocked, but it's what we talked about a couple weeks ago, just in terms of not being where we needed to be on either side of the ball. And both things showed up tonight. We weren't really good offensively. We weren't really good defensively either. Knew our defense was behind, and that's our calling card. So I look at the stat sheet, and there's not a quarter where we hold our opponent in single digits, and that's something that we, normally pride ourselves in. So we got a lot of work to do. We've been telling our team that. It's unfortunate that they learned that lesson in this kind of way. Let's give Royce credit. They came out and attacked us from tip. This team was an NCAA tournament team last year, and they came out with that type of confidence. And we just continued to, even when we got the lead, turn it over, not get a rebound, not box out, not get checked up. We just have a lot of work to do.
A lot of adjustments are on the defensive side of the ball. And most of it is like really simple principles that like you learn in like grade school. I think it's just like not being under your man, jumping to the ball, like easy things that are easy fixes. So I think we're going to make those changes. And I know tomorrow in practice that we're going to work on all those things that we need to work on.
So that was after the game Monday, after falling 62-56 A&M Corpus Christi. Just a few other things scanning here. Defensively is interesting because I didn't think they played terribly. 15 turnovers forced. Held them to 41% from the field, 31% from 3. Those are fine numbers, but I think as Joni Taylor mentioned, just like we talked about on the men's side, never really had A&M Corpus Christi in a position where they just went in a rut to where they couldn't get out of it. And relative to your competition, even though, as she mentioned, they were a tournament team, less than maybe you would like to do. I mean, let's just be honest. You should be winning this game on paper by like at least 20 points, maybe 25, 30, if you're really going to be a player in the SEC. And then my concern too is like offensively, they just lost so much between India Rogers. She graduated, but India Rogers, I'm going to forget some people, but KK Green, you had Michaela Johnson. You had Janiah Barker, obviously. Tanea Hilton, Sylvia Bowles, Sydney Bowles, excuse me. So they lost a lot, and they did not really bring in a lot of comparable offense that we saw. They basically have, Sahara Jones, Lauren Ware is back, along with Aisha Coulibaly, who hurt her hand in this game. Update is really no update as of Tuesday. Still getting it looked at, but doesn't sound like it's super serious, which is maybe a little bit of good news there. She's probably your most dynamic, versatile player on both sides, along with Lauren Ware. But Sahara Jones, Aisha Coulibaly, Lauren Ware, Jada Malone back from injury. She actually looks pretty good, I will say. And then Soleil Williams is a girl who, a young lady who really kind of seemed like she was stepping into her own at times as a freshman, who hopefully you could see take that big step. And she knocked down a couple threes, 2 for 8. So she wasn't great efficiency wise, but maybe something to build on there. But really, Kendall Hunter is another one who's back from an injury. So I thought she looked good. running the offense at times. Turned the ball over a little too much, but something you could hopefully build off there. Transfer from Texas who suffered an injury before last season. Erica Moon also, I believe, coming back from injury as well. So kind of a tough start to the week, tough week in general, as we said, for A&M athletics, A&M basketball, men and women, agonizing defeats for different reasons. And up next let me take a look at what is coming up next for both these teams. They both, of course, will play again this weekend while football is off. The women are at home tomorrow, 11 a.m. against UTSA. On Thursday, I should say, depending on when you're watching this. And then the men, the men are at home on Friday against A&M Commerce. I saw Kentucky on the schedule. My heart jumped, but that was volleyball. So we'll see. The men should be able to bounce back against A&M Commerce, as should the ladies against UTSA. But just kind of things to monitor as we work through the year. And the women also, by the way, at home against Western Michigan on Sunday. So that is the state of Aggie sports on this Wednesday, November 6th. We appreciate you tuning in. If you haven't already, like the video down here, I think, and subscribe. That should be like right here or something. And let us know what you like to see, what you enjoy about the show. Keep the conversation going. What did you think about the college football playoff rankings? Do you like where A&M is positioned? Does it really not matter at this point to you? Are you worried about A&M getting boxed out if they go 10-3 and they make it to the SEC championship game, but they do lose? If that's going to potentially hurt them, or is there no situation where they're leaving an SEC finalist out? I doubt it, but I don't know. I guess crazier stuff can happen, and would have maybe preferred to see not only teams A&M ahead of some teams, but just getting anxiety seeing the path that these teams ahead of A&M have in terms of being able to, avoid some losses maybe, and just the schedule lining up in their favor. But let us know what you think. All in Aggies, Ben Peck here. We will see you back here next time.
All in Sports Network. We love sports.